Welcome to the first part of my Learn PHP coding tutorial. In this series, I'll be introducing you to the basics of PHP and helping you to get started. This tutorial series is designed for beginners who have very little or no experience with PHP, as it will cover many of the basics. Most of the things that we learn in this series will easily translate to many other coding languages. If you're interested in learning other languages, please check out my other coding tutorial series. If you're not a beginner and already have a good knowledge of PHP, you may also wish to check out some of my more advanced PHP tutorials. This series does assume that you have a basic understanding of HTML. Throughout this series, I'll be using my preferred editor, Adobe Dreamweaver. However, there are many other great editors available to use with PHP, many of which are free or much less expensive than Adobe Suite. One free editor I would recommend is called Brackets. I will leave a link to Brackets in the description of this video. What is PHP? PHP is a coding language that is predominantly used for web development, whether simple web design or very complex back-end web services. If you're creative, you can certainly find other non-web related ways to use it, but for the most part, it is a language intended for the web. Some great things about PHP is that it's free, it is relatively easy to learn and quick to get started, and once you learn it, it is a very powerful language. PHP is a recursive acronym which stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. It's a somewhat confusing name, but the important parts are hypertext and preprocessor. If you're familiar with HTML, you know that HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Hypertext refers to text which is displayed on a computer screen or electronic device, commonly what you see on a website. PHP is, in a sense, among other things, generating hypertext, but doing so prior to the web browser processing the HTML, hence the word preprocessor. There are many different coding languages out there, but most of them can be categorized in one of three categories: server-side, client-side, and compiled. PHP would be categorized as server-side. Server-side and client-side are languages that are not necessarily built or compiled. Instead, they are parsed or executed each time that they are called. Technically, these would be called scripting languages, as you are using them to write scripts rather than full programs. However, with PHP, you can certainly create large and complex web services using a multitude of complex PHP scripts. This means that you can write the code and instantly publish it and run it. The code will be parsed each time it is run, and the output will be generated almost instantaneously. If you make a small change to the code, you do not need to rebuild or refactor it, and that change is immediately available to the user once they refresh that page. Whereas compiled code would be referring to any code that is used to build a typically standalone app or program, which must first be built or compiled and then released or downloaded prior to being used. If you make changes to compiled code, you will have to recompile it, and then the user will have to re-download or update the version before the user will have access to the changed software. The difference between server-side and client-side is that the server-side languages are processed by the server before sending any output to the user, whereas the client-side code is not processed at all on the server and is simply provided to the user for the user's web browser to process on its own. PHP is a server-side scripting language. Because PHP is a server-side language, this means that your PHP code will not be publicly available to your website's users. Your website parses the code and generates the output, if any, and then alters the output which is sent to the client prior to the client receiving any information. As an example, here's a very basic PHP file containing very basic HTML along with a short PHP script. If we open this page in our browser, right-click and click Inspect, we can see the source code and we can see that the PHP script is not here. The only information we see where the script should be is what was output by the PHP script using the echo command. During this tutorial series, in order to follow along or in order to get started with PHP, you will require access to a PHP server. Simply saving your PHP file on your computer and opening it in a web browser will appear like a plain text file without processing the PHP code. This is because the PHP server is what does the pre-processing of the hypertext. Because PHP is a server-side language and not a client-side language, your web browser does not have the ability to parse the PHP code. I will not go into details of setting up a PHP server in this video. However, I have included links in the description of this video to help you set up a PHP server on Windows, Mac, or Linux. Throughout this tutorial series, I will be using a Windows-based PHP server and running everything on localhost, which basically just means my local computer. In actual practice and production environments, I use Linux servers, but for the simplicity of this series, I will keep everything local rather than dealing with transferring or uploading files to a publicly accessible web server. In the next part of this tutorial, we will build your first PHP script. If you found this tutorial to be helpful, please smash the like button and please consider sharing or subscribing, as all of those things really help me to continue to create meaningful and helpful coding tutorials. Thank you for watching.